Good evening. This is Lama Tantrapa with the second episode of this webinar series dedicated to the spiritual dimensions of martial arts. We are with Lama Rangbar tonight, who will be sharing with us the practices and the principles that assist the practitioners of martial arts and energy arts in developing greater sense of energy awareness as well as personal development. In our previous episode of our webinar series, we already covered the foundational principles and built the foundation for the further enhancement of the spiritual process of the martial artist or the practitioner of Tselung, the Tibetan energy art. Lama, would you share with us a little bit about Tselung and what is it dedicated to and what are the purposes of practicing this art?
First of all, thank you for running this program. I think it's very wonderful. And of course, first of all, we have to start with the motivation for the practice. And here I can safely say either martial arts or Salung, whatever you're doing, it should be understood that all beings are seeking happiness. Whether you're an earthworm crawling to your next meal, or you're a dog or a human or whatever kind of being you might be, it's a process of seeking happiness that's happening. And every being wants happiness. So people practice martial arts actually because they want to be happy, right? I mean, if they want to get the better of their opponent, they feel that martial art will be the thing that helps them do that. So they'll be happy once they accomplish that. If they want to defend themselves from things they don't like, that interfere with their happiness, then they would practice martial art because they want to be happy. They don't want to be suffering.
Right.
So similarly for the Ana Yoga, there's a basic fundamental problem with our relationship with the phenomena. So we are not happy about something. And I could coin a phrase here. I think I have said this before, so I think it works pretty well. Everything's fine unless you want something to be a particular way.
Everything is fine unless you want things to be different from the way they are now.
Exactly. Or if you want them to be a particular way and it's not, then you have a problem getting there, for example, getting to that point.
Right. Well, and when we engage in the study of martial arts or other related disciplines, obviously there is a motivation to develop certain prowess or develop certain skill or perhaps a level of discipline and self-control that could be applied to circumstances in life in which they would be helpful. But obviously there are even more advanced or perhaps more profound reasons for us to study these arts. So will you share with us a little bit about those?
Yes, so as I was saying, it's important to recognize that we're not the only ones seeking happiness when doing anything. So, and in fact, it's important to recognize that all beings are seeking happiness, including your opponent, including the people around you. And so we take these teachings. I'm forming the background for taking the teachings about the Salung and this teaching, by the way, is more about the theory, because I'm not teaching right now Salung. I'm trying to communicate to people the playing field. What is the ground? Where do we stand as a human on this ground? And then go into the Salung as a way of forming a kind of staged understanding of how these things would go.
And why would we even want to engage in this study?
Right, exactly. So the point is that the person who's receiving the teachings should do so with the bodhisattva mind. All the martial artists who started in the Shaolin Temple, for example, the monks, maybe the nuns, I don't know if they had nuns but back then, but I'm sure they do now. So all the conscripts of that temple would be taking vows, bodhicitta vows, bodhisattva vows, for example, and then they would receive the martial arts. So this is important to understand the context. Now, when we come to the Salung, we're actually using this term Salung, and the term actually means nerve and wind, and it's short for the term Salung Tigle, which means nerve, wind, and seed essences.
Right.
And so all martial artists have body, speech, and mind. When you go to practice martial arts, you may move your body, you may scream at someone and say, "Hiya," or whatever it is you're going to say. You may say, "No, thank you, I don't want to pick a fight with you. Please, I didn't mean you any harm, didn't mean to insult you." You might, that's a martial arts also, right? As my teacher used to say.
Of a different sort.
Running is also martial arts. So, you know,
it depends on which direction you're running.
For example, if you're a fighter, and this is coming from someone who I feel was a great fighter. He said, if you're a fighter, there's two places you wind up. He said, hospital or jail. Okay? So if you're really a fighter, someone who likes to pick a fight and be in fights all the time, these are kind of natural conclusions. So we're not talking to the people here who are practicing martial art for a different purpose. They're not practicing martial arts to wind up in jail or in the hospital. They're practicing martial arts for their own personal development. And so therefore that has a kind of epiphany, or it has a kind of a peak, let's say, that one could accomplish something quite high, or there's a certain point one could come to. So it's important to understand that the body, speech, and mind, you bring these three things to your martial arts, you bring them to your life, you bring them everywhere. Nerve, the impulses that run along the nerves, what we call the winds or prana, and then the seed essence. You could call it seed essence, you could also call it awareness. And these two are related, and I'll explain how they're related. And it's important to understand that the three bodies, there are two types of nervous system, essentially. One of them is the gross material nerve. The gross material nerve is something that you could get cut open and, you know, on the autopsy table or whatever, and they will find this nerve and that nerve.
Right.
This is the gross material nerve. And then there's what's called the wisdom nerve, which is something you won't find on the operating table. I would say it may be better to express it not as a nerve, but as a channel. So these two things are not, one is supportive of the other. This gross physical body is an opportunity to develop the wisdom channels. And so when we talk in a common sense, common way, we talk about body, speech, and mind, our flesh, our speech, or our breath, and we talk about how we're thinking. So these are kind of the ordinary aspect. From a practitioner's point of view, we have mudra, mantra, and samadhi. A mudra is the form that you're moving your body, how you're disciplining a certain practice of symbolic representation or posture. Mantra would be formulaic speech. In other words, it's not just a sloppy speech, but it's formulated a certain way, towards a certain end, perhaps. And then you have samadhi, which means, could be translated as concentration, meditative absorption. It could be there are actually many types of samadhi, and one of them is like a flowing river samadhi. There's many types of samadhi, and there are different ways of describing what what is actually happening in the meditation. And they're not all the same.
Right. They also integrated. And whenever people try to separate the mind from the body, for example, or the mind from energy, or energy from the physicality, I always smile because it's the same organism. And trying to separate the mind from the body is pretty futile. Just like trying to separate the energy from the physical body. Well, try to live your life without life force. So, yeah, please go on.
We can come back to this point in a minute because it's just remind me later about separating the mind from the body. There's an interesting story there. So, then the martial arts system. I'm going to juxtapose them now, not mix them. I'm going to juxtapose them. So typically, one is doing physical exercises that. In fact, there's a lot of discussion about how the martial arts would clear your channels for the qi to flow properly, what type of flow of qi there is, and ultimately a training of the skin as an organ, and of course all the other organs, you know, liver, kidney, lungs, heart, circulatory, everything. And in the Salung, we're taking this, when we talk Salung, we call it Anu Yoga in Tibetan language. It is one of the top 3 yogas, Anu, Maha Anu, and Ati.
Well, Anu Yoga is actually in Sanskrit. Salung is a Tibetan term.
Right, right. What did I say?
You said you call it Anu Yoga in Tibetan, which is in reverse. Anu Yoga, Sanskrit, Salung.
Yeah, Maha Anu Ati is a Sanskrit, right? Sorry. So in these 3 top yogas, we're getting close to the top of the yogas, the union practices. When we say union, I'm not necessarily talking about physical union with a partner. I'm talking about union of the male and female luminosities inside a practitioner, or union with the all-pervasive nature, for example, primordial wisdom. If we understand that the body is a kind of transceiver, it's a transmitter and a receiver. It's an organism that performs a lot of functions. Of course, it has the power system, like a computer has a power system. It takes food in, it transmutes calories into energy that can propel itself with this energy. That's its base power supply. Then it has the ability to perceive, to take in an information, process it, and then send out another signal. So it's like a radio. It's doing this on many levels. Most people are doing it on a very gross level. It's a very kind of a dumbed down level. And others are bringing this to a very subtle level, where you would have, you know, mind-to-mind, very easy time doing a mind-to-mind discussion, for example, or something like that. The martial art is actually, in my opinion, and I won't say this is not like a solid opinion, it is a by and large, it is a preparation for the rigors of the refined meditations, where you're going to be able to need to sit in meditation posture for quite a long time, settle your prana, settle your winds down, and really let the mind go into its natural state. So the martial art gives an excellent base for these higher practices as well.
Right, and besides that, martial art training also develops a tremendous amount of acceptance of how things are, so that even though the person may engage in the study of martial arts initially, trying to change things from the way they are to the way that they want them to be, because, well, obviously they may not accept that they get beat up a lot, or they may not accept that they're physically weak or incapable of certain feats of power. With practice, you actually develop a much greater level of acceptance and understanding that everything is perfect the way it is, even though it may have some room for improvement.
Hmm.
And that recognition also leads to being able to flow with the events in your life. So you're no longer struggling against the events or against the people who you're surrounded with or against the nature around you, but rather feel the flow of things and learn how to be in the flow. And those who learn and practice being in the flow prove to be most successful as martial artists because they cannot defeat anybody who is fully in the flow.
So yes, as you rightly stated, then martial art becomes a natural process or a process of naturalization. Naturalization. And I think a martial artist eventually comes to know that there are, I mean, intuitively, if not from the lineage transmission by mouth, they come to know intuitively that there is an individual karma that they have, and then the karma of the society. So, for example, the collective karma of your family, the collective karma of New York State, for example, or the collective karma of USA. So there are these kind of causes and conditions which are kind of close to home, namely you, and then something more broad. And there's a relationship between these two, but they're not necessarily one and the same, or they don't appear to be one and the same for most people. Let's put it that way. So,
Exactly. So once we really come to conclusion or just visceral experience of oneness, then of course they are the same. But until that point in time, they appear to be different.
right. So we have to recognize as a martial artist and as a Buddhist or as someone practicing the Salung, for example, we have to be aware of outer, inner, and secret. So I'm going to be talking in threes a lot. Body, speech, mind, mudra, mantra, samadhi. Then we have the three kayas. I'll explain that in a minute. But then you have outer, inner, and secret. Mm-hmm. The outer phenomena that you're looking at, the inner phenomena of your physical condition, that could be being sick or healthy. It could be a number of things about your humors. It's funny, in the old days they used to say humors, and humors had to do with, someone could be quite irritable with the, or we say he has a lot of gall. You have a lot of gall to say something like that, or
So, and we're not talking about the gallbladder product.
Actually, that's what I'm saying. There is a connection. So people used to understand that if you had a liver disorder, you could very well be an irritable person. So it was understood that the humors, we used to talk about humors of the body, so that's inner. And
well, I have a humerus. My bone of the upper arm is called the humerus.
Yes, that's what it is. Then you have secret. So outer is in the case of martial art, outer is facing your opponent, right? Then inner is maybe your balance or imbalance. Secret has to do with doubts and confusion about what you're actually perceiving, what's going on. You could say misperception, right? Because the one thing you don't want to do as a martial artist is have a lot of projections and misperceptions about what you're doing, what's in front of you.
Exactly, and if you do, then you better learn really quickly how to overcome these misperceptions. Okay. So they're inevitably going to be happening, but how long we succumb to them for, that is a good question.
Here's a good point you just made. There's also something we could say subtle, more subtle, and super subtle. So, for example, if we're looking at a radio, if you tune a radio, you have to be very subtle. You have to tune the dial, and it has to come precisely to a certain frequency, and then only you can hear the station. And if you've tuned it at all improperly, you'll hear some other station or nothing at all. So we're talking about subtle attunement. And a general martial artist will have a certain, I mean, anybody, you don't have to be a martial artist, but anybody will have a condition of their prana. The winds that are flowing in their body will have a certain, it's like a Kodak moment. Your body is a perfect Kodak shot of who you are karmically, what you think, how you feel. You're a perfect representation of who you are. The more subtle has to do with confidence, flexibility of the impulses of your prana. In other words, some kind of smoothness, some kind of mastery of that, some kind of recognition, being able to recognize when your prana is smooth or when it is rough. And this is when you start to be able to differentiate between your hallucination about someone and what they really are. So once you start to be able to have a little bit more self-perception about that because of your, I would say, introspection ability based on settling down the mind, then you can, that's the first stage of recognizing that, wait a second, this external phenomena is really actually kind of mirroring my own energy state. And then the super subtle is based on a good foundation in what I just mentioned, and then being able to go through the process of what we would loosely call distillation. And I think the Taoists have that, the Buddhists have that, and this is a process of that I'm going to get into in a minute. So, and now we come back again to fundamental point. In order to, in order to be happy, I think we really have to recognize our own faults. This is very difficult to do. I don't think most of us are really that open about it. We tend to resist citing our own faults, confessing our own faults, identifying them. I think they're quite annoying and troublesome for a lot of people. They get us into trouble. They seem to be something best left, on the I can't help it kind of list. I can't help these things. These are my faults, so I can't help it, so I can't deal with those things. I can't correct them very easily. But in fact, our faults, our arrogance, our ignorance, our neurotic grasping, our hatred, all these kind of things, our faults, are actually the thing causing us immense discomfort. They are hell on wheels for us, and they control us a lot. And so to recognize this is a great thing. So the process of meditation deals with that. And so now I'm going to enter into the Salung a little bit more. So there's a certain process that a baby or any human being will take in food. The best portion of the food will be extracted and become blood. So the blood is manufactured and then filtered, and the best portion of the blood, after it's been filtered, goes to the heart, is allowed to travel to the heart. The best portion of the heart's blood is filtered again through the mesh of the bone structure, like those little spongy parts of the bone. You see in the legs and different parts of the bone, they're spongy. And those are, again, a filtration process to produce the bone marrow. And the best of the bone marrow is again filtered by the bone again, and also other natural process of the body to become the seed essences.
As far as I know from my studies of anatomy and physiology, those spongy parts of the bones is where the red blood cells are developed.
Well, I use this term filtration loosely, but there is an enhancement process, let's call it an enhancement. And Chinese people talk about Jing in the bone marrow, they talk about Jing. Now, the thing here is that a Western doctor will have a hard time with this one, and that is that there is, at a certain stage, a discussion of luminosity going on here. Because the best portion of the bone marrow, which becomes the what we call the tigle in Tibetan, and I don't think although this is typically, these things are held secret, not taught widely unless for initiates. At the same time, we've come to a point in our planet where, I mean, these things are available. You know, you could read about these things anyway. And so this theory is not bad to have. I think it's like an instruction book for people to consider. And so then the seed essences are developed, both the male and female seed essences. In Tibetan way of thinking, or in the Buddhist tradition, the woman has a blood essence, a red and a white essence, and the man has a red and a white essence. So we're talking about cells of light now also, luminous cells. Largely this is, and the best portion of that seed essence has what we call, could be termed vidya. And vidya has to do with awareness. So there's a relationship between this body, what you eat, and its ability to sustain awareness, or to be a house of awareness. And this is important to know. It's very important that if your body is functioning properly and doing its job properly, your awareness is going to be conditioned and is supported by, or not supported by, how you behave with your body. The foods you eat, how you conduct yourself, and then, of course, do you do any practices of cultivation and whatnot, meditation, that would also further aid in this process of distillation, for example. So how you operate these three aspects, the body, speech, mind, the nerve, the wind, and the tigle, will determine if your life is long or short. It will determine the types of experiences you have. Whether you see something as pleasant or unpleasant, things like this. I have a note here to tell a story, to interject a story.
Okay, please do.
The condition of Salung Tigli, how you're thinking and how your body is, will start to influence, you know, I like this thing and I don't like this thing. Maybe type of food, maybe. So in some parts of the world, things that are rotting are delicious, and in some parts of the world, of course, things that are rotting should be thrown away. So for example, I mean, wine is something kind of rotten, actually. It's rotted fruit in a certain way. But I'm going to tell a story. So my wife is Nepali. And up in that region, of course, things come from Bhutan now and then. And the Bhutanese, there's a certain type of cheese they have, which is quite rotten. I mean, whatever you define
in
as...
Europe, there is a Roquefort and a variety of other blue cheeses that smell pretty rotten too.
Yes, and the Bhutanese is very distinctive in that respect. It's not like any of the others, but boy, it smells like, you know, it's quite a strong smell, and I happen to love it. And so for me, the Bhutanese cheese is a type of heaven, In other words, I'm happy when I get a chance to taste that. I become happy.
A delicacy.
A delicacy. And when my wife, when we open the box, then she'll run out of the room, and maybe she'll be thinking about getting a new husband, for all I know. But the thing is that the cheese is very intolerable for her. It's hell for her and heaven for me. So this is partly our conditioning, right? I mean, she may have a kind of a physical reaction to that, where maybe she feels like, you know, very sick from that, literally. And when I smell it, my mouth may water. It's maybe a totally different reaction, you see? So the cheese is the same, and we're both human beings. So there you have a kind of illustration of the humors being different, right?
Well, I would say that my favorite way to understand this is from point of view of developing equanimity. In other words, developing the state of consciousness in which you come to a recognition that nothing is inherently good or bad. You literally quit assessing things as good or bad, right or wrong, and instead recognize that they're all simply on a broad scale of things that you resonate with or don't resonate with as much. And depending on how well you resonate with something, that will provide you a greater sense of pleasure or satisfaction or happiness, if you will. My lighting changed. Well, again, somebody who is in the process of organizing a webinar like this would get really frustrated. Oh my God, my lighting just died on me right in the middle of the production. It's a terrible thing. And instead of getting my panties in the wad, so to speak, I just look at it, okay, well, there's less lighting now, let's move on. So just another example of how equanimity really keeps us from getting stressed out, from taking life too seriously. You start taking life in strides, so to speak, and that actually leads to much greater level of acceptance and happiness.
This is a good point. You were talking about the kind of questions that can arise, and one of them is, and I haven't gotten yet very far into the salon, but I think let's hang out here for a while because I think it's good to just touch base here. How do you know if you're doing it well, or how do you, what are the signs of accomplishing salon or something like that you mentioned? So, for example, if one is really becoming good at the salon, one of the signs is that the person becomes has more patience, more compassion, more tolerance, and not so fast to be. If you insult them, they don't take it personally so much. They might laugh. They might laugh because they're just watching you and what you're going through, and they don't feel that your words, your concepts, have to be their own. So, for example, if you have the concept, "you fat pig" or something, and you say that, and a person who's practicing salon may see that very objectively and say, well, something I've done has perhaps angered this person, and maybe this person has issues with fat people. Maybe this, they will see it kind of objectively and with the lens of compassion. So, and if you ask me as a martial artist, well, that's quite disarming, isn't it? I mean, people refer to, a good lama would be disarming. In other words, you would go there, maybe you would have, someone who might have, not like religious people, for example, and approach a lama and have something against them, and after meeting a lama would feel, oh, he's okay, actually, and this is because of the kind of natural love and acceptance a lama would develop. This is a sign of the practice, right?
Right.
So,
before I became a lama, I was mostly focusing my training on martial arts. I noticed that even then, I would smile or laugh when people would try to insult me. And the funny thing happened. It would actually irritate or even drive them crazy, because you start laughing at them in response to them trying to assault you somehow. Well, they don't know what to do with you, and they really get irritated. But at the same time, they don't have the energy anymore to continue this assault. So they kind of change their state of consciousness. Well, then it's just a matter of playing with different states of consciousness as they continue to change. And then it's not a problem anymore. It's an excellent opportunity to learn something about the transition from one state of consciousness to another.
exactly. So I think we come back to the motivation for practicing Salong. It's very important because even the motivation itself, without the Salong, for example, if we have the motivation that uh, we want to protect ourselves from our own suffering, and we'll do whatever we can to bring things that make us happy towards us, and we will get rid of the things that make us unhappy. We have a lot of turbulence as an individual, for example. But when we start to consider others and how they might feel about something, that they too are suffering, and we reframe our motivation, we start to think, oh, that person is suffering, having an uneasy time, and I have framed my mind in such a way that I can look into that for them, what is ailing them, and check it out and see if I can be of some service to them in some way. You become maybe more like a doctor. So, of course, the patients sometimes lash out at the doctor, but generally speaking, the doctor is not personally offended by that, and wants to try to help the person not to suffer. So when we even just adjust our mind towards the bodhicitta, towards compassion, towards recognizing the suffering of others, it is already a commencement onto the path of Salung. Even though we're not maybe jumping around or doing the exercises of Salung, we have a body, speech, and mind, and our prana will start to listen to our thoughts. It will affect how the winds in our body travel around. So rather than bracing, for example, one would have an outpouring of compassion or softness, and that softness affects our nerves as well. So the nerves then become very sensitized, I would say, and accurate, because they're not trying to block any information or defend against information, but to be open to it, open to what's there. So this is already a natural Salung. So it is how the mind frame will affect the prana, will affect the nerves. This is a natural thing, quite natural. And it has an immediate effect. So in the martial art, in particular, what wins is a spirit of true openness and flexibility, triumphs over perceptions of wanting to get over on your enemy, so to speak, wanting to inflict some kind of damage or to make things a certain way. So that's there, I mean, from the martial art point of view. But by and large, I would venture to say, and this may not be true for everybody, but I think it's true for the people who have made the lineages of martial art, that the martial arts is geared as a kind of petri dish for us to be able to gradually check how we're doing. So, for example, in our school, we are brothers and sisters checking each other out with sparring, and we're seeing where we're at. And each person is a different character, giving us new opportunities to check what's getting us upset, or what challenges, what type of style of challenges we're being faced with, and to slowly start to recognize how our mind is actually. It's a good way to test how our mind is affecting our body, our prana, and everything. So it's a very beautiful tradition that way. It's brothers and sisters helping each other very skillfully. And then you come to a point at some stage where you're able to do these things internally, just sitting there. In other words, you come to a point where the things have become very subtle, and you can control your breath, the nature of the breath, how you settle the mind down. So
well, not only something that happens internally, it also happens externally outside of the context of the martial art practice with your brothers and sisters in your particular school or family. Because then you actually learn how to overcome the entire notion of perceiving another human being as an opponent or as an enemy, and develop a different notion of perceiving that human being as another human being. So there is no need to struggle against them as long as there is a recognition that that person also has certain needs, and some of those needs are not being met. And he or she is trying to meet their needs by standing up to you, or perhaps even trying to attack you. But instead of going against their needs, we actually recognize, well, they're dreaming. They are in a certain state of consciousness in which they perceive you as a certain obstacle in their path to happiness. And so if they think that they will remove you as that obstacle, then they will be happy. And you essentially encourage them and empower them to change that perception of you from an opponent to also perceive you as a counterpart in this dance of discovering how to be happy without trying to remove some obstacles. And so in other words, you basically transcend the whole idea of opposition or dualism of the me versus my opponent.
Right.
So in other words, it's a tantric practice in the sense that you engage in something that seems to be paradoxically aggressive or physically reactive, but transition from the reactivity to being responsive and being able to collaborate with a person in discovering the path to happiness for both of you.
Yes. You know, when we talk about the Buddha, he has various names. Some types of Buddhas are called arhats. We say foe destroyer. Sometimes we say conqueror of the enemy. Buddha is known as conqueror of the enemy. And this is where the duality has been really transcended. And the mind is always in reflection, understanding the self-nature of phenomena. So this is kind of an ultimate aspect of that. And the martial arts are, you know, by and large, although I think, of course, they were used, you could say, exploited, you know, to sometimes even to fight a war. They were exploited at some points, but by and large, we're talking about, it's a very paradoxical in a way, because we are at a stage in our planet now where a failure to recognize our interdependence is a failure to recognize what's good for us. And because we think we could perhaps destroy someone else and that would be okay with us, that would be good for us. And now we realize the planet's too small to think like that, or we're starting to. The planet has a feedback system, so no matter how much you might want to be an advocate for nuclear power, the fact that you should not buy fish from Japan anymore is an indication that something's not right about what happened or what could happen, and there are potential hazards. And so the feedback system, the nervous system of the internet, for example, is a feedback system of what's going on with us. So now we may not be, even though many people still may be very ignorant or behave in a crude way, by and large, the younger generation, for example, is starting to realize, you know, at the very least, be careful of seaweed from Japan. It's radioactive, or something like that, and radioactive is a bad thing. And so, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So there's an antibody created in our mind that, well, radiation is not good for humans. So do we really need a nuclear power plant? You know, are bombs really going to be good for us in the end? Is it something that we could get away with? Is it important to build up a nuclear arsenal to blow away the other half of the world? Would that leave us in a part of a world where the other half that's remaining be a tolerable world with all that radiation anyway. So we start to recognize our interdependence. It's a wonderful thing, actually, this is the time we're going in. But are we recognizing it fast enough? You know, you extrapolate these things to the world. My hope is that martial arts, and people who practice martial arts, and the teachers who teach it as well, start to become the incubating place for self-realization, you could say, for peace. In other words, the martial artist would really understand peace. When we used to practice at my teacher's house, at his center. I was young and in college, and I think I was terribly arrogant, horribly arrogant, and they were all Asians. I was in a totally Asian situation, and they kept to their culture. They spoke a different language. I was really the odd man out. It was sometimes quite awful. And they used to laugh when I did certain things, and I couldn't see what I was doing wrong, and they were all laughing at me. They all started break out laughing without talking to each other. They would start to laugh, about something I was doing, and I couldn't figure out. Maybe I thought I was saintly or something. I don't know. Maybe I had that kind of edge, like these guys are, doing martial arts, and I'm a non-violent person. In fact, my motivation for studying martial arts, it was a physical education credit in my school, and I thought, I would study that and would get me into shape, and maybe it has some meditation, in it, I thought. And there was something very strange for me because I sometimes perceived what they were doing as or something violent. And one time my teacher said to me, out of all the people in here, it's very funny to hear you say that because you're the most violent of all of us. We play martial art and we punch each other and throw each other on the ground. But the one who has the most violent mind is you. And I kind of, maybe I can imagine, it's a long time ago now, but I imagine my face scrunched up. And I thought, why would you say that about me? But
he really doesn't understand me. I am the nonviolent one.
Yeah.
Just turning things around.
But then later I became to understand how arrogance and the ego is such a force of violence, actually. And so gradually by practicing the martial art, by practicing something which, to the naked eye looks like something violent. I mean, when we look up, when we go to a movie, it says this movie has violence in it because there are people smacking each other on the head with the boards or whatever, or fighting kung fu, so it might say violence. But when we watch, something else like people doing hostile takeovers at Wall Street, it's not called violence. It's something else. But that's actually the kind of epitome of violence. So if the martial art places are transformed by a spiritual practice, in other words, and this could be by meditation. I think many systems of martial arts have meditation systems. Some have lost them. But by and large, if this was the teaching of compassion, of creating spiritual warriors, if you will, that are trying to conquer their own negativity or their own confusion and to relate compassionately and bring this kind of corporate culture, I'd say martial arts corporate culture, I mean the culture of martial arts, the culture of peace to the world, and help people to understand what is violent and what is nonviolent, really. Then the martial artists are serving the original purpose of the Shaolin, really.
Which is? Which would be the original purpose of the Shaolin in your mind?
Well, I think Bodhidharma, Pamo, as we say, the fifth patriarch of Buddhism, was actually trying to communicate quite a high level. We say his name was Padamba Sangha in Tibetan, so he was trying to communicate an enlightened view of meditation in action to his students. And of course, the system he developed probably had a lot of cultural context. It was a skillful means for the monks and nuns or whatever at the time. But I think the purpose of him establishing the temple was to make a bastion to protect that crucible, that learning crucible, to protect what was a mind sciences university, let's say. I would say body, speech, and mind sciences university. And to protect that crucible, that petri dish, or whatever you want to call it, it had the martial aspect that, well, you know, like I said before, it wouldn't be enlightened for us to all just get slaughtered. And it's a very lovely story. I don't remember if I told him that. There was maybe it's a band of monks traveling from one place to another in a procession, or a single monk or something maybe, and he gets held up by some marauders, or I think a criminal, a robber of some kind, who says, you know, give me your things, I'm going to take your life now, I'm going to kill you and take your things. And the monk says, well, I don't think I'd do that if I were you. And he'd say, why not? The robber said, why shouldn't I do that? There's no one around and I can kill you. And the monk said, well, you see, I'm a monk, and if you do that, your sin will be quite intense, you know.
Haven't you heard of karma?
Yeah. So, and I'm a monk, which means that it's a worse karma than killing someone else. And the robber looked at him and he said, so the monk said, well, would you mind if I give my vows back? You know, if I give my vows back now, then you kill me, it's less sin for you. And the robber said, yeah, okay, do what you have to do, you know. So the monk gave back his vows, and the monk said, now I'm going to kill you. And the robber said, excuse me, he said, well, I had a vow not to kill you, you know, not to kill, but now that I've given up those vows, I can kill you. So he killed the robber. But it's just I don't know why I'm saying this story, but the point.
Well, let me ask you this. You mentioned the idea of spiritual warrior, and obviously this idea has been popular for many, many years. It probably dates back to the old Shambhala kingdom in Tibet, or perhaps even way before that. Would you share with us a little bit about what that means to be a spiritual warrior, and how one knows if one is actually a spiritual warrior or not?
I think that's a great question, wonderful question. First of all, and this is going to sound very funny, but the first sign of being a spiritual warrior is being brave enough to recognize your own faults, like I said before. To admit them. They're no friends of ours anyway. You know, if there was some really obnoxious person next to me, I'd probably want to disown them as a friend. I'd want to make a disclaimer, this is not my friend, I don't know them. Your faults, it's not that you want to say, I don't know them, but you want to say, these are faults of mine, and by recognizing them, one could be not under their power anymore. So recognizing your own faults, the vulnerability is actually the vulnerability of a martial artist. The recognizing one's vulnerability, one's temporal nature, temporariness, that suffering is the thing that people are trying to avoid. This vulnerability makes for a good martial artist, actually. It makes for a good, it is an identifying feature of someone who's brave, of someone who's not cheap, not miserly.
And not trying to pretend to be somebody who he or she is not. Because the pretense is actually what robs you of power. Because when you're pretending, you don't allow yourself to be natural. How do you do that? Well, you actually do that by tensing up to strike a pose. And the more there is discrepancy between how we are and how we try to be, the more tension we develop in our bodies, which both creates energy blockages, limits our range of motion, and makes our movements weak or deficient because we can't coordinate and we use the whole body fluidly and seamlessly. Everything is disjointed and riddled with tension. So that is a major spiritual challenge for the spiritual warriors. How to accept themselves who they are so that they don't pretend.
And I think now we can talk again, we can go further, we can talk more now about the next topic, which we promised, and that is the purification. Because a good warrior, a good spiritual warrior, for example, again, it's not cheap. If it's too good to be true, it's probably not true. So sometimes a good spiritual warrior, karmic warrior, or spiritual warrior is someone who's actually ready to go through quite a bit of introspection and purification, and to endure that process lovingly and gladly, has recognized the source of the problems and is willing to dedicate him or herself 24 hours to getting past this neurosis, getting past this garbage, recognizing how vast it is and not being daunted by that, being empowered by our teachers, our lineages. And I don't say that, for example, no one can reach enlightenment without a guru, but I don't think, in fact, there is anyone who has, because by nature the guru is at least the vast, all-pervasive primordial wisdom is a guru. So, yeah.
Whenever we separate ourselves from our guru, we still believe and exhibit the belief in separation. So that essentially means that we still have ways to go.
Right. So, so what I'm saying here is that the process of purification, to go through to, you know, a real, I would say, spiritual warrior, you could say, or a practitioner. When we say a practitioner is what we mean someone who's ready to go to endure and to move through this process, dedicating their whole life to that, recognizing how important it is. For example, like I think I said before, if your head was on fire and you had a glass of water, probably you're not going to drink the water. You're going to say, this is the most important tool I have right now to put out the fire on my head. Even though I'm very thirsty, I think I'm going to take care of the most important thing first. Similarly, if you recognize that how your life is going, the factors that contribute to your happiness or suffering are largely something to do with your internal ability to recognize your traits and process your faults and look squarely at them, then you would be quite vigilant at tending to that. You would become a person of great integrity, and you would refine that, and so you would find that these people would be identifiable, that they have a certain amount of great consistency to them, and they are not too extremely variable. They're not too erratic. And if they are erratic, there could be a very good reason for it. Maybe it's a teaching of some kind, but you know, by and large, you would find a great consistency to these as a mark for these people.
Or maybe they're spontaneous. So, and being authentic to themselves and being moved by the flow of their own energy flowing authentically, whatever the way it flows, they may actually exercise spontaneity. So that may appear to be erratic to an observer who doesn't understand what's really going on within. But it may appear totally in harmony with the flow of things if the person actually observes the flow of energy within.
That's what we call Gombachen in Tibetan, or sometimes we say that we talk about Mahasiddha behavior. It's the great accomplished masters have these strange behaviors because they are kind of unbound. They're not going to react as we would predict most human beings to react. So they might exhibit very strange behaviors. There's a lot of wonderful stories through Tibet about these Mahasiddhas, or through India about these strange behaviors of enlightened beings.
Right.
And,
Of course, anybody who's read stories about Tilopa and Marpa and Milarepa would probably have their fill of stories about how strange things may be for enlightened people.
right. And at the same time, now we live in a society, a different type of society. It's not the wild, wild west anymore, really. It seems that, of course, we have some very radical behavior on the streets here and there, what we would call radical behavior, but Trungpa Rinpoche, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, was one of the people, one of the lamas who brought Tibetan Buddhism to America, Vajrayana, and I think he was one of the pioneers, and so he had to clear up a lot of misconceptions about it, and at the same time he was a Mahasiddha himself and had a very challenging behavior that challenged his students and their perceptions, etc.
And himself.
And he made a comment that was very funny. He said, you know, you're going to become intelligent. He said, there's no enlightenment ward in the hospital. He said,
well, if there is enlightenment in the hospital ward, it's probably not because you accomplished something, but probably despite all the things that you have done. So in other words, we may still experience enlightenment in a hospital ward, maybe even on a deathbed. It's just going to be relatively short-lived.
No, that's different. He said, you made a spin on the words, I think.
Okay.
There's no enlightenment ward in the hospital. There may very well be enlightenment in the wards.
Oh, I see.
But there's no... all pumpkins are squash, not all squash are pumpkins. So there may be enlightenment happening in the hospital ward somewhere, but if people attain enlightenment, there's still a certain amount of harmony that, even though they're expressing what you would consider to be a strange behavior, they probably won't wind up in the hospital. They're too intelligent.
Well, I think it was Paramahamsa Yogananda who said that the main difference between the enlightened individuals and folks in the psychiatric asylum is knowing who to talk to.
Knowing who to talk to. Knowing how to talk, I think also.
Yeah, knowing who to talk to about your experiences of
Right.
spiritual emergence. Well, I know that you wanted to present to us tonight certain movements that can be dedicated to addressing either energetic imbalances or emotional or physical imbalances. Perhaps those imbalances go hand in hand. Would you care to give us a little bit of an introduction to the subject matter?
Many people say, well, what style do you practice? And one person says, I practice Bakwa. Or another person says, I practice Xingyi. Or I practice, peach blossom system. I practice, for example, peach blossom maybe gave birth to the Taekwondo. Okay, so there's different kind of things. They say, I practice this and that. And they view these in the martial world more as a kind of, well, that's my fighting style. I practice drunken style. So Jackie Chan may have made a movie where he's getting intoxicated and he's he's actually really getting drunk. He's getting the better of his enemy.
Yeah, it's a very popular style in Russia, especially.
Yeah. Okay. So
it's a national national pastime to get drunk and then get into a brawl.
Everybody's drunk all the time on vodka, so they had to practice martial arts at some stage, and they're always drunk, so they called it drunken style. Okay. So what happened is that I think the popularization of these styles, that it's a fighting style or something like that, And that's, most people will, I think most people think, well, it's just a fighting style, like tiger, crane, alligator, or whatever it is that you're practicing. So, and there is alligator, by the way, dragon, etc., the animals, the deity styles. They may think of these things as a fighting style, a way to, a better way or a different way. Some people talk about praying mantis or something like that, or, somebody observed these things in nature. Bamboo, we have in our system, for example, bamboo leaves, or we have the small wave or the large wave, that's about an ocean. And so there are a lot of very amazing different types of movements. Our system, I think I have not seen, and maybe this is my weakness in research, but there was just in my school a blizzard of movements of these different things. I couldn't believe. And my teacher said he released maybe a tenth of what he had. That was all he was able to release, because, and the funny thing is that, so the popularization or the populist view of these movements is, oh, it's a martial movement. But in my school, the movements were given because of body type, character type, and the type of journey the soul, or I would say the personality was going through. So, and as a curative, as a way of bringing the student to an epiphany or to cross over a certain problem they were having. So, for example, if we talk about the drunken style, in my school, this was largely a way to solve certain subconscious problems. The drunken,
such as alcoholism.
It could solve alcoholism, but the sequence, the movements are normally given in. If you bring someone through, if you want to make someone into a holder of that movement, the first movement they're going to get is drunken God receives the wine. So he's going to take the wine. And at that stage, when that's given to, I don't know if I should be saying these things out loud, but I'm going to, I don't see this as, because there is room for misunderstanding of what I'm saying. That's why it's not that it's a secret or something, but
we'll have to ask those deities that were preventing us from going on air for a while today, that they allow you to.
This is different. I mean to say here that for example, we should endeavor to clarify any misunderstandings that may arise. So, for example, a teacher may look at a student and say, this person is blocking life for themselves, and may get a sign or indication. And we were taught, just like a Chinese doctor would read your pulse and give you a medicine prescription, we became knowledgeable about facilitating certain breakthroughs for the student, for example, facilitating. A drunken God, by and large, you can say to someone who's very stubborn or who is rejecting life or having a certain problem, you can say, go out and get a girlfriend. You can tell them that.
Get a life.
Get a life. You can say that. And there's certain ways of relating to your student, or your, like, if they're relating to you as a Kalyana Mitra, like a spiritual friend, there are ways of relating with your student in a way that, makes karma, and there's a way of doing it that is a little more subtle. So, for example, my teacher at some point wanted me to stay put and not run away from the training. And I received white cranes circling the nest. So, whatever it is, the effect was that I kind of didn't really feel like going out of the training center ever. This was told to me later on. At first they just gave it to me, and I just did it because I was practicing white crane circling the nest. What did I know? And then later on it was time for me to travel, and my teacher gave me, he wanted me to get out and move, and gave me white crane leaves the nest.
So he tricked you, essentially.
So Now I thought, and now I thought, and these things had, very very fast effect. I wasn't monitoring that in that way because they didn't tell me verbally, this is why I'm giving it to you. That's kind of defeats the purpose in a way. They just did it, and I said, well, I'd really like to leave now or something. So that, if someone needs to go through a certain type of life experience, you might give them drunken God receives the wine. All of a sudden, they're going to have a lot of girlfriends. That's just the way it is. Second thing,
That's a really tough side effect of practice.
no matter how much kung fu you practice, if you're a guy who likes ladies, and no matter how much kung fu you practice, when you meet a beautiful woman you have karma with, your kung fu is useless.
Well, it depends what kind of kung fu you practice.
Well, I mean, just, when you want to punish your student with life, okay? I know this sounds a little strange, but sometimes a student needs a natural punishment. So you put them through that kind of situation. Now that looks great, but there's karmic effect. Yeah, there's a cause and effect there. So at a certain point later, the teacher has to kind of catch up with the student and give him drunken God refuses the wine. So to kind of bring him back, he has to go through that experience fully and completely, so that it doesn't become a huge pent-up obstacle to the meditation later on. You see, I'm just telling you. I'm just explaining how this is not just, I'm going to teach you how to fight other people using drunken style. This is not about that. So I'm introducing these movements, a couple of movements. I will do one or two now because we're prepared for that. And the first one I'm going to do is Leo Cup. Okay, so Leo Cup, I think in let's see if this will go over the. Oops. So do you know this Tibetan symbol? Like this symbol you see a lot. Can you see it? It's like a knot.
Infinite knot.
Yeah. So it's related with the number 6. Some movements are related with numbers, not related.
Yeah, number 6 is unlike most other styles where there are some special numbers and that usually are other than 6. Actually, in my lineage, 6 is the most auspicious number.
Okay, so we have 6. We have Bakwa is 8 directions. Chitsek is 7 colors. Loheng is 5 elements. Sampo is 3 jewels. Blah blah blah. Susi is 4 corners. This is the Leo cup, and it has to do with the harmony, creating harmony, and is used for if people are too spaced out, they become grounded if they're too grounded. And this also has to do with the jade gate.
In the Oriental medicine is often referred to as the jade pillow.
Jade pillow, okay. Yeah, so this is a ventilating system, a balancing system for that gate. And then after the Leo cup, I think I'll do the Tai Chi Shu, which is the called the big sleeve movement.
Okay, great.
Give me a second to get. So,
very nice.
Leo cup is a medicine and also used in sparring as well to make the flow continuous. And this is called the Tai Chi Shu.
Right. Great. So how do you use exactly these movements in a way that it would affect the person's energy or help a person overcome certain obstacles in their personal or spiritual development?
The first one, the Liokop, like I said, some people are spaced out. They tend to just be flaky or in the clouds or not paying attention to the ground
Stuck
reality.
in the head?
When someone who's stuck in the head or someone who's stuck in the body, one or the other, it makes it a chance for a balancing to occur naturally. And this is because the Leo cup is actually, it's not like we're going like this and then changing our hands abruptly. It's all in a flow, like that knot of eternity. So it's always moving, including the bottom portion of the body. So it creates this infinite loop. And so one never has a moment or never has to worry about a stagnating feature. And this is also important in a martial art application, for example. Right? So doing this movement, it gives them no choice because the hands are rotating, the jade pillow is rotating from these hands moving like this, changing their course. So it creates a situation where the consciousness, the awareness will go down with the prana. You're breathing naturally. When you're doing this movement, we're not telling people you should breathe like this or you should breathe like that. But after many hours of doing the movement, there's a natural breathing pattern which starts to set in. Okay. And the breath starts to, it's just the way you're stretching the meridians that, and the chakras, you know, each, there's more than just the chakras that we have, you know, along the central column, the central channel. There are also chakras in the hands. Sure. So these become stimulated by the breath and the change of their positioning. So the mind is making the left and right channel is making a kind of how would you say? There's a relationship between the way the brain cognitizes and the energy mechanism of the body. There's a relationship. So, for example, if you were to become enraged, if you had a thought that made you enraged or peaceful, it sends a signal to your energy system, okay, now I'm peaceful, there's no reason to have a flight mechanism or a fight mechanism. So the energy system of the body down below acts accordingly. If you start to become very upset, maybe you have to fight or flee the situation, then again a signal will be sent from the brain down and the energy system will be enacted. So there's a kind of relationship going on, right?
This is what I call harmonious culture movement. The culture movement that does not have the jerky motions or start-stop movements, and none of the movements is linear. So by definition, harmonious culture movement is also something that engages the whole body in a very integral way, in a very harmonious way. And what you did through your demonstration was a nice sample of how one's body can move in a harmonious way. And the funny thing is that it's impossible to move harmoniously if you're mentally imbalanced or in a state of disharmony. So there are certain preliminary practices that actually help achieve a harmonious state of consciousness so that one can move like this. But at the same time, if you want to stay in this harmonious state, you can actually use this movement. And the more harmoniously you move, moment after moment, the more you maintain the harmonious state of consciousness. And this may actually be something that can last for minutes or hours or even days.
This is a very beautiful, it could be a moment of summation of our talk tonight, because it ties back my character is that I believe that what you see in the microcosm will be reflected in the macrocosm, and vice versa. And so I always want to make sure that I'm looking at both, not seeing them as separate. And then we have a situation that arises in my personality then. So, for example, this notion of dialogue with brothers and sisters in a dojo, the beauty of that dialogue, the ability to use that arena for self-development, self-recognition, and to help your brothers and sisters to do this process together. And this means that I always thought about, okay, well, if it's our brothers and sisters here in this particular town who are able to come, well, what about the rest of society? Because our whole society may have a sickness as well. May have, my teacher used to speak about an individual sickness or the sickness of a specific culture or country, and taught me about what, from his perspective, what the types of illnesses we had as Americans, as a culture, what type of growth problems we had, or things like that, and he'd point those out to me. And the Tai Chi Shu, the big sleeve, has to do with different types of circle of energy. You can have a small circle, your own circle of friends, and you can have this kind of, country or the world. And if you're going to be benefiting the world, it's not that you abandon your community or something like that on a microcosm, but there are ways of gearing your playing field so that you are concerned with the welfare of many people. And you would try to graduate from being able to help your immediate family members to helping to your community, to giving back to your state, maybe your country or something like this. So why is this a nice summation? Is because it brought me back to say that there's, of course, 100,000 illnesses and 100,000 medicines, 100,000 different, countless types of students. So one has to be an apothecary, and one has to think on one's feet. I want to bring us back to the universal, and that is, in conclusion, I want to say that my prayer is that all the martial artists who practice their martial art, please remember all the brothers and sisters of the planet are all interdependent, all suffering, all looking for happiness, and to try to use the martial arts as a way of recognizing what is violence and what is non-violence, to become non-violent people, to become peaceful, and to engage in projects. Now it's an advertisement in a way, but to engage in projects that bring peace to the world, that bring people together in the dojo for whatever purposes. And I wanted to show you the stupa, and I'll show you 1 second, a model of the stupa we'd like to make, which is my dojo at the moment, in the sense that the arena of the Tai Chi Shu, the long sleeve for me, the broad strokes for humanity, my expression of that, my resolution of that is to build a stupa where we all come together as a humanity, not as this ethnic group or this school or this system, but as a humanity. I want to show you a picture of what that building might look like.
It's a mandala-like image of a stupa architecture.
Yes. So this is the Great Mandala for World Peace, a model of it. And I hope people later on take interest in looking at www.bodhivastu.org, B-O-D-H-I, V as in Victor, A-S-T-U, bodhivastu.org, or the Great Mandala for World Peace.org. This structure is something we hope to be built by everyone in the world together as a symbol of our interdependence and relation to each other, and a symbol of the all-pervasive wisdom. So my prayer is that this comes to fruition, and that we continue to work together to bring this kind of culture of peace.
Thank you very much for giving us a wonderful presentation tonight, despite all the technical challenges that we experienced in the beginning. and I'm glad that we are in the flow now, so let's continue the flow. I look forward to talking to you, and I look forward to speaking to all of our listeners and viewers next Wednesday, which will be January 30th, also the same time at 9 p.m. Eastern Time.